The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with the panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bount, who will be discussing current events today. So, gentlemen, what is happening today and what is most on your mind? We have Syria that has been taken over, and Bashir al-Assad has run off to Russia, and I don't know, the ruble has collapsed. Kash Patel has his enemies list. Trump is calling Prime Minister Trudeau Governor Trudeau of Canada, and there's talk of Israel having invaded another country. We have a lot going on. So which of you would like to start off, and what is most on your mind?
Well, so Mark, if you don't mind, I'll just take the first whack at this because Brooklyn mentioned Israel invading another country, which I think is a reference to the fact that Israel has moved from the Golan Heights into this sort of neutral zone that they had established with Syria some time ago. And they're in that neutral zone and maybe a little bit on the other side of it. They've taken Mount Hermon, which is a strategic mountain that gives them oversight on the valley that Iran used to use to run weapons and things into Lebanon. So now they have, Israel was on one side of the mountain. The stuff that was going on the other side of the mountain was blind to them. Now they have eyes on that because they've got the mountain, the entire thing, and they have oversight on Syria. It's got quite a good view. I believe you can see Damascus from there, and so they're probably somewhere from 19 to 25 miles away from Damascus. They are destroying a lot of Syrian assets that they don't want falling into jihadist hands. And they are, basically going to not invade Syria itself or not, move further into Syria, but they're trying to neutralize any weapons that might be used against them if this thing goes south, which there's still a fair amount of possibilities that it could. The situation so far has been great. I think it is shocking actually how bad Assad was. What we're seeing from videos in the prisons that they're liberating, and what we're seeing from some of his more heinous butchers that they've captured and are hanging as soon as they get them, which probably is something that we should talk about, whether that's a good move or not, or whether they should put these guys on trial. But, the situation is very fluid right now, and they're destroying Russian assets as well to make sure that they don't fall into anybody else's hands. And, I think that the situation is kind of like so far so good, but we're cautiously optimistic.
You're right. The Assad regime was rather brutal. It was kind of funny that, the people that were like on Assad's side, there's that one area over by the Mediterranean that was behind Assad, and the Christians were accepting of Assad. The big question is going to be is how are these other ethnic groups and these other religious groups going to pan out once it's all figured out who's actually going to be running the country. Now, the rebels have said that they are going to be treating everybody equally and fairly, so we'll take them at their word for right now. But the question really comes down to is what's this going to look like as far as internally to Syria, and what is it going to look like for the Middle East on the whole when we're talking about things like relationships with Israel? How is that going to pan out? When we're looking at what's going to happen to the Russian naval base that is in Syria. That may go away. And, really what role will Iran play? Iran played a very big role in the Assad regime. What role, if any, will Iran play? So there's a lot of questions. It's going to take some time to figure out, only because it's still in flux as of right now. And I don't really think that they've figured out exactly. I mean, they're going to try a coalition that they're talking about, but what exactly it's going to look like, I think is going to be something that we won't find out for probably a couple of months when they start working it out, because there's a lot of cleanup. There's a lot of cleanup that has to be done in Syria, keeping in mind how many refugees from Syria are they going to come back? How's that going to impact the country's economy? How is that going to be bolstered up? So as I say, right now there's just so many different things out there, different ways this could go, and it's all going to start with, okay, who's in charge, and what does this in charge look like? News reports have said that some of the rebels that were backed by the United States were really Islamic fundamentalists. What is it going to look like? Islamic fundamentalists historically have not shown great tolerance to other religious groups. And as I say, they're claiming they're going to do this. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but hey, we have to sit back and wait and see. Is it better than the Assad regime? Yeah, maybe. We'll have to see.
The expression, you can't tell the players without a scorecard. The scorecard here is like the Encyclopedia Britannica. There's a lot of factions, and you mentioned Christians and how they seem to be more at peace with Assad than a lot of the Muslim groups. And it's worth pointing out, I guess, that Assad was Alawite, which is almost more like a cult than a religion. It is not quite Islamic, although it has parts of Islam in it. But there's another, for more or less God. I'm not quite sure how to explain this. There's like a triumvirate of gods. And so it's like Allah and the Prophet and some other guy, Bashar, and they worship them all equally. And it's a minority. It's a very, I think it's only about 10% of the entire population. And they did not get along very well with the Islamists or even the Muslim population, and seem to probably because Assad was educated in Europe and spent a lot of his life in Europe, seems more at peace with the Christian world of Europe than he does with the Middle Eastern world, that is Muslim. But in the meantime, Mohammed al-Bashir was the governor of the Idlib province in Syria, which is where HTS, the lead rebel group, is from, that province. And he's sort of like right now the interim prime minister of Syria until something like March or thereabouts. And I guess they're trying to see what how he handles his authority, and how the more hardline groups are brought under the wing of this HTS, whose leader seems to think that his wild and crazy days are behind him, and that he's more interested in being a just ruler or just power broker than he is being a terrorist.
Right. And we also, another consideration is the Kurds, and where does Turkey fit into all this? A lot of the news reports are saying that this is a huge, setback for for Iran and for Russia, but that it is a win for Turkey. And now we're going to see exactly where do the Kurds fit into all this. And just like the Kurds that were in Iraq, they seem to be they're kind of separate. And it'll be interesting to see if they get integrated, because they are a large population. The Kurds are a fairly good-sized population. And it's a little difficult to have a country when you have a I won't say a major, but a large section of your population basically disenfranchised and not participating in the country's affairs. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes as well. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeart Radio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.